Hey there, I'm Annie Dickerson.
And I'm Susan Elliott.
On today's show, we have the pleasure of speaking with Kim Knievel. She is a corporate burnout survivor. She is now a freelance writer, a mom, and she's also going to dive into something way woo-woo, which is Akashic Records and her experience with the Akashic Records and how it completely transformed her journey.
Yeah. And in particular, I want you to listen out for, she was called to explore the Akashic Records because of a fantastic burnout. And I think so many of us have experienced some type of burnout in our histories. But for those of us who aren't in a burnout phase, but that we're seeking, like, is this really like my life path? Is this really what I'm meant to be doing? And I think that if we're not continually asking that question almost every year, every quarter, we're not necessarily evolving to find our greatest potential, our best life by design. And she really kind of talks about how finding the Akashic Records was her way to be able to learn how to do that herself, to be able to navigate each one of those mini challenges as she goes, each one of those little crumbles as we talk about. So stay tuned for listening about what to do when it feels like there might be some crumbling that's happening underneath you in your foundation. And the second thing I want you to listen out for is that she was like, okay, this is super woo-woo. I'm going to do it because it's another tool in my bank, but that it actually turned into something incredibly practical for her. And I think those of us who are seeking more understanding with our finances, with our life journey, our life path, we naturally have a little bit of a practical brain in there. Like, we want to know our returns. We want to know our 5-year projection. We want to know these things that can help us make decisions in everyday life. And to marry that with a spiritual path is really rare, I think. So stay tuned. This is a good one.
And one thing that Kim is really passionate about is the power of community. It's something that we're super passionate about here as well. That's why we've created the Goodegg Investor Club. It's a community of people who are all looking to improve on their life and their money, to create wealth through investing passively in real estate syndications, which are group investments. If you're new to real estate investing, or if you're a seasoned investor and you want to join up with a community, we're here for you to support you along the way. Just go to goodegginvestments.com/invest. All right. With that, let's dive into our conversation with Kim Knievel. Kim, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm an avid listener of the podcast, so truly it's an honor to be sitting with both of you. I'm totally inspired by your stories and the work you're doing in the world. So thank you so much.
I can't tell you how delighted we are to have you here. You and I have met a number of times in person. You're based here in the Bay Area, and we've had some really great soul-nourishing conversations. And I'm so excited to bring that to this conversation today. And I want to start with that really pivotal moment, because I know you had it all, Kim. You had it all on paper. You had the career, you were climbing the corporate ladder, you were doing all the things. You were young in your career and you were rising in the ranks and making all these connections. But suddenly things started to break down, and it led to this complete transformation in your journey. So take us back to that time in your journey. What was happening in your life? And then how did you start to get those whispers, so to speak, that maybe this wasn't the right path for you?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I hope in my story that your listeners will hear and listen something to take away, because I think honestly, a lot of people are having these moments of following and pursuing one path only to reach that metaphorical mountaintop, and suddenly it all needs to crumble and fall apart. And it's okay. It's beautiful if we let it crumble. So what happened to me, my goal and my vision for my entire career was to make it to running communications for a sports brand. And I did it. I reached my mountaintop. I was about to get married. I was engaged to the love of my life. And we were pursuing the planning for getting our wedding all set. The other backdrop was the pandemic was happening. So there was a lot of time and soul introspection that was happening while simultaneously we were physically moving our life forward into the next chapter. And along the way, I started to experience things in my body. I was waking up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was unable to go back to sleep. this progressed into a series of panic attacks where really, truly, my body had been trying to get a hold of me for years. Then it resulted in, you're not paying attention. I'm going to shake you out of this life and force you to think about, is this really the path that you want to pursue? Because like you mentioned, on paper, I had everything that I ever wanted, but there was a big part of me that knew, and frankly, that my soul had been trying to get a hold of me for a long time just because I was achieving external success. I wasn't feeling it internally. It wasn't actually my story to be living. So when I say a lot of people probably experience this, we pursue these paths of maybe they were the dreams that we hatched 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Maybe they were someone else's story to begin with. But to me, this wake up was the result of a decade of introspective work that came to this head in this moment. So what ended up happening is I took a step back from said dream career that I had worked so hard for. I think I just devastated 26-year-old me who had been working and fighting so hard for this position. And I got an Akashic record reading. This was one of the spiritual practices that I had pursued as part of my path. And this is where the insight came about take a step back. So I did. And I went and got married. We went on our honeymoon. And that's where the whispers really got loud. And the thing I want to underline here is it's often really inconvenient when this starts happening. Like dismantling all of this is not a convenient thing by any stretch of the imagination. But the message I got was to pursue understanding this practice of the Akashic records more. And I had never even heard of it. It sounded like a very foreign term. I had dabbled in astrology and mediumship and had gotten a yoga teacher certification, but this was the one that really spoke to me and catapulted me into getting a certification, which as part of the certification was really just for my own personal growth and development to try to make sense of how could I have pursued a path that was so off course for me and where did that deviation happen, to doing practice readings for people where I started cracking other people wide open in the same way that I had gotten cracked wide open. And ultimately, I got laid off from the corporate job that I went back to part-time after this journey.
That was your soul going, no, 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 part-time. Little is putting your soul there. You got to, come on, Kim, come over here.
That's exactly right. Like this is the other big part for people is we'll keep talking if you keep listening, and you just need to keep listening to what's there. So what happened is I became a mom. I launched a business with this practice. So today here I am kind of synthesizing my communications background, working in the Akashic records and helping other people tune into their intuition to use for their work and their life. And the crumbling kind of keeps happening. This is not something that it's one and done. This is a consistent practice of tapping into what's right for you individually, and the specificity of what's right for you in your life, I think is another really big thing to listen to. And the only way you're going to get there is if you slow down enough to hear it.
Yeah. It's like a cosmic alarm clock went off for you and you kept snoozing and snoozing and it was like, not going away. But your story, as I was listening to you tell your story, it really reminds me of, and I know you know the story of the farmer with the son. And I'm going to tell it to the listener, just in case the listener hasn't heard this story before. But I think it's really relevant because there's a lot of parallels in your journey and how you surrendered from strength and just followed where the path led you. Maybe not at first. But anyway, the story goes, I might butcher this, but this is my understanding of the story. I'll get the gist of it. There was a farmer who had a son. He had a horse. The horse ran away. The people said, oh, no, what a terrible thing. Your horse ran away. And the farmer said, maybe. And the next day, the horse came back and brought 3 wild horses with it. They said, wow, what a fortuitous thing. You now have 4 horses. And the farmer said, maybe. That day, the son was training one of the wild horses, fell off the horse, broke his leg. And they said, oh, what misfortune. Your son broke his leg. And the farmer said, maybe. And the next day, the army came around to conscript young men for the army. And because his son was injured, he couldn't go. So he was passed over for the army. And so they said, oh, such luck that your son was injured and doesn't have to go. And he said, maybe. So the point of the story is you don't know if something that's happening is good or bad. And we all tend to judge it before we see the big picture. But I'm sure that in those early days, and I want to drill in just a little bit there before we get to what you do now, that it seems you've gotten better and better at saying, you know what? I don't see the full picture. I'm just going to go with it. I don't know if this is good or bad, but I trust that this is part of the bigger plan.
I imagine it as like getting better at being on top of the crumble. You're like, you experienced the crashing down of the mountain and the crumbling of it. I think the first time around, it's quite traumatic, perhaps, of just like, what is rocking my world? Especially those of us who kind of just follow the default path in life of getting a great job and getting married and doing these things, but without asking the deeper questions of like kind of what our purpose was. But then, like you said, as it keeps on crumbling, you're just sort of like, just to have light feet then. Oh, it's crumbling a little over here. Like, what do I need to do to move forward? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love that story of, is it? Is it? And the crumbling, if I think about actually even going back to college, I wanted to be a teacher originally, and then got talked into communications and PR because I loved to write. I loved to communicate with people. I could connect with people. So it's like these little sort of things start to show up. I pursued this communications career and was in a yoga teacher training at the same time. Like I mentioned, I'll never forget, I got this huge promotion on the day that my yoga teacher training started. And I drug myself to that studio and I was crying. And I was like, what is happening here? Like, I am pursuing this very cool path in my corporate career. And also I'm pursuing soul interest and getting to know myself better. But here I am just breaking down. So these moments happen. It kept happening. The boss that I had at my last job, I actually followed her to this company. And I told her, and I don't remember this, I said, I will give you 2 years and that's it. I'm done. I'm not doing communications anymore. So sometimes we just have to plant the seeds along the way and trust the process and let ourselves be in the process that we need to be. I really believe the things that come into our life, you could look at it like your life movie, are there to help provoke you to grow, to change, to shift, maybe to bring something forward that you need to see that you wouldn't otherwise experience if you didn't let yourself just be in it. And I think this is one of the biggest dangers of the instant gratification society that we live in, of like the second it doesn't feel right, like get off course. And that's actually, I personally believe, not the right method. Like, I'm an athlete through and through. I played soccer through college. There's something to be said about pushing yourself and pushing yourself to your potential and keeping your feet to that fire. But the dance is knowing when it's time. It's a level of self-mastery you're only going to experience by getting to know who you are and living through these things. The experience that we get through living our life is actually where the true wisdom comes into play. I mean, I love podcasts and books and like taking in information, but nothing is going to replace the own experience that we have within our lives if we're willing to look at it.
Before we get into the Akashic Records, because I definitely want to dig into that, I want to go back to that time that you're mentioning here, this kind of dichotomy, this kind of inner battle that you were having. It seems you had this path that you had planned out versus this path that life was pulling you toward. Tell us more about that, because I have a sense that maybe the listener is on a path that they're like, okay, this is the way I'm supposed to go, but they feel this pull, or they've heard those whispers, or the cosmic alarm clock has gone off and they don't know how to reconcile the two pieces. Do I go full over here, or do I continue doing what I'm doing? Walk us a little bit through how you navigated that.
Oh my gosh. I think that duality is actually there to serve us too. We're almost taught you need to choose one or the other. You can be this or that, black or white. So when I was going through my own kind of beginning of my awakening, and just to be clear, like I had all these deep feelings when I was growing up. Like I was a very intuitive kid. I would think I would hear things in the house that I grew up in, which now like I really actually think I probably was hearing and feeling different things. And I had a very supportive household. Like I have an amazing family that I grew up in, and still we each have to go on our own journeys. So as I was in the corporate world and started to feel like this isn't it. I mean, this really started when I was like 24 years old. And I think for me, it's just like letting yourself sit in that a little bit. Interesting. Like if you can step outside of yourself to almost observe, like there's something here. This is where like things like journaling, writing down your thoughts, audio recording yourself can even be helpful just to even catch on paper. It's confusing when it's up in our heads or even living in our bodies if we don't see it down on paper, like starting to get those thoughts out just so you can observe them. I think for me, I also didn't have the courage to let the worlds blend together. I was super concerned that I was in a very ambitious environment. I was working with top CEOs, companies like Microsoft, Under Armour, Old Navy, that felt like I actually might compromise my ambition and the vision that I had for my career if I start talking about things like I intuitively felt like. And so really what I started to do is presented things as, here's the data, when really it was laced with my intuitive knowing of like, this is what's right, just because I can feel it in my heart. I can feel it in my mind. So for me, it was really about starting to gain the courage even to talk about this stuff. I kept my spiritual pursuits very separate from my corporate. I almost had two different identities that I would embody. I would go into the corporate world and Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 or more, because let's talk about the realities of the corporate world. I would be grinding and forcing and pushing and using this intellectual brain. Then I would go into nights or weekends and I would let myself feel into, like this doesn't make a lot of sense. So really my path was about having the courage to own who I am. And I think that's a path that a lot of us are walking right now of understanding actually the unique tapestry that is all these different parts of us. If we learn to work with it is where the gift is. It's not about we're constantly looking outside of ourselves for the information, the validation. This is the playbook. This is the path to success. But if we can look inside and start pulling out like, oh, I have this intellectual mind that's fantastic and I have a lot of skills over here, but I also have this intuitive ability. What if I marry the two? What if I start to apply creativity to my life and to my approach of, I haven't seen this, because we all have these unique gifts, soul missions and soul purposes that are embedded in us. And I really, truly believe one of the biggest things that we're supposed to do while we're here is to go find it and to live into it. And sometimes that takes going down meandering paths to get the tools that we need to then pull it out of us, to understand that this is the way, is living into it.
I like how you spoke about just like forcing the trigger to be able to do the deeper work. I think many people, if it was just to say like, just sit on your cushion and listen to yourself, people would be like, I got the things to do today, and then I'm going to do that tomorrow. And the kids, okay, they need that. Your brain just moves around. But if you can say, okay, just start recording it on audio, just start writing something down about your thoughts, your feelings, about how things are separated and why that separation isn't true, because you're a person and you can move into one path, and just starting to question these things is really helpful for the listener to begin thinking about it, so that if you are on the brink of a crumble, that you're starting to build the inner tools of knowing to say, to accept it and to move forward with it.
As I'm listening to you, I can sense the listener's fear as you're speaking. This whole like, yeah, I know that that's what I should be doing. And I know that these things are happening. But what you're talking about, that's really scary to me. If I were to go and actually pursue that, I know you did it and you're amazing. You did great, but I can't do it. I'm not like that. And this is where I want to bring the Akashic Records in, because I know it made such a big difference in your journey. And Susan and I have both had the pleasure of having Akashic Record readings by you. And Susan, I definitely want to hear your experience. Why don't you take the lead on this section?
Yeah, I'm so curious. Let's go back to how you first became exposed to the Akashic Record, and give the listener a little bit of a background as to what this is and then how you found it.
I just quickly want to go one step back to what we were talking about of the fear of flipping your life upside down. Like, I think we're conditioned to go, again, I was like this one day and I need to quit everything and go sell all my stuff and move in RRV and go travel around the world. No, like I'm asking or I'm introducing or provoking 10 minutes of your day to start introducing a new practice or a different mentality. This isn't about going and burning it all down as some people's path, but simple tweaks are actually where the biggest joy and the biggest gold, I think, exists within. And this is what I love about the Akashic Records, because it is, of the spiritual systems that I personally experienced, the most practical. I found it to be the most practical because it's rooted in the story of your soul. So just to take a step back, as the background of the Akashic Records, you will hear it referenced throughout time. It's referenced in different ways as the book of life, the all-knowing source of information. And for me, when I found it and I had this reading, it felt like this remembrance and this sense of home. Like, oh, this is a validation of a lot of what I have been thinking and what I have personally been already feeling. It's not like fortune telling where something came out and like, boom, here's your answer and your key. So through the records, we can access the soul story of anything that has ever been in existence. So a person, a house, a business, anything. Through it, we can get intuitive insight and data that then we take into our lives to work with and bring change. And I think the records really emphasize free will. And it's another big part of the practice that I like. It's one thing to just get data. Data is data. Whether we're talking about numbers data, whether we're talking about intuitive data, it's really about how you internalize and work with the information that you receive is where the magic happens. Personally, the way that people seem to experience the Akashic Records with me in particular, it's almost like being able to sit down and have a cup of coffee with your soul or a glass of wine with your soul. You pick your poison there, but it's this remembrance of who we are and what we came here to do so that we can step into the paths that are made for us specifically. And that specificity is also I want to underline and star and highlight that point because it really is about feeling into what's here and what's right for us.
Tell us about the first time you had an Akashic record then. And like, how did that cue into you wanting to provide this to other people?
Yeah. So my journey into the Akashic Records, totally unexpected. Like I mentioned, I had tried all the other spiritual practices and I'd gone back to a coach I had and I'm like, I'm drawing a blank. All the tools that I've had are not working. Like all the physical, practical, and spiritual tools, nothing is working. And she recommended the Akashic Records. I was like, okay, like this is the most out there one that I've experienced yet. Let's go. And through what was going on during my life during this time is I was investigating, do I want to take a step back from my corporate career? I was about to get married and we knew we wanted to try to start our family shortly thereafter. And the insight that I got was you're not going to be able to be the kind of mom you want to be if you keep pursuing this corporate career. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because when I say I knew, there is no way I could be the kind of mom and have the kind of presence that I wanted to bring, that I saw and envisioned to bring my child and hopefully future children. That never would have been possible. So it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. I ended up going to my boss and taking the step back from my corporate career, taking a sabbatical. Again, want to emphasize this was after nearly a decade of doing my own internal exploration. And so the people who find me with the Akashic Records, they're ready to look inside. They've probably tried other things that haven't worked for them. They have a lot of courage. This is a path, I would say, really of courage and of ultimate self-awareness and humility. Again, it's not fortune telling. It's not this, oh yeah, here's your key. Like go on right off into the sunset, rainbows and butterflies. Like far from it. Actually, a lot of what comes through for me, for clients, ends up being that inconvenience factor of if you really truly want to step into what your soul came here to do, you're likely going to have to make some kind of shift or change, subtle as it may be, of starting your day differently, or bigger, like the career that's not really working for you, if we're honest with ourselves.
Yeah. I like that you were just like, I've tried it all. What else is there? Come on. And that's kind of where you landed there. I think that when I looked up a little bit more before you did my recording, my reading, I was like, okay, tell me a little bit more about Akashic. And one of the things that I saw was like, well, you probably heard of karma, right? Karma is something that's really hard to put data behind. It's a feeling, it's a thing. Well, the Akashic Records, like very kind of similar. And that helped me to build a bridge. Like, oh, this is just kind of another interpretation of the energy that's being exchanged, our stories, our histories, our souls, our spirits, all of these things that are really hard to point down and pin down. But by you bringing in the words practical and data provided, and that this isn't the fix-all scenario, this isn't a fortune-telling method, it actually brings it down into a little bit more of reality in that. That's kind of what the soul feels like to me. it's a reading in the moment and it's interpretation of a lifetime of activities and interactions. So if I can glean any insight in there as far as connections and moments and what things have to do right now that I can't see personally, I haven't been able to kind of build that inner knowing up to that ability. It feels like it's an amazing resource to just kind of be brought into that. If someone is willing to open themselves up to it, if they're willing to say like, yes, let's try this, let's try one more thing and see if it will work. So I think the listener can really, there's a lot of options out there, and we would encourage you to explore many of them to get to know yourself a little bit more, to be able to hone your life and your money, therefore, into the direction that you kind of envision for you and your family. So this is a great one. So you just provided my recording just in the past week, and I was really blown away by it. You and I have never spoken in person before. I hope that we do get to meet in person sometime. But it was really amazing to just like feel so seen and heard by what you were giving me, in that like, oh, yep, I kind of sensed that. I sensed all these things. It was like you were helping me to affirm my inner knowing a little bit, because nothing in there was so shocking off the charts, but it was like, oh, yep, you're right. I've been avoiding that. I've been dancing around that. And for you to kind of have brought that out in me, I don't know. I felt like I got to know myself better.
That's amazing. I love that outcome. Like ultimately, I think we all need to use discernment with these tools that we're going and investigating and trying. And ultimately, you have to put it through the filter of what feels right for you and what is right for you. And I love what you said about the data. So if you look up a lot of the famous business leaders and world leaders throughout history, they talk about using some kind of spiritual practice or practice to connect with their intuition. And I think as the world continues to advance and we're getting all these new amazing technological tools like AI and all this data is right at our fingertips, it's on us that we need to upgrade our human technology and our human discernment to be able to filter through what feels right for me. Because it would become very easy to outsource and to not drop into that level of specificity of what you came here to do and what feels right. And feeling is really one of the biggest things that I want to help people to reclaim, because your feelings are 1,000,000% valid. They 1,000,000% belong in the boardroom and in our homes, because they're our light source. It's not to be taken as just direct truths. You need to put them through the filter of your mind. But this practice really does bridge intuition and intellect so you can move in the world in the way that feels right for you.
I love that. Upgrade your human technology. That's really good. Yeah. To meet life where it's taking you and all these advancements. I mean, you can't just operate with the same hardware that you have been. You've got to find new tools as you have. So you did my Akashic Records reading in person in my home. You did Susan's asynchronously. You had never met Susan in person, and you did an asynchronous recording for her. How is that possible? I mean, how is it possible that you can span distances, having never met somebody, and give them a reading that's so spot on that it makes this meaningful difference in their lives?
The things that I need in order to tap into someone's Akashic record, be it in person or through a recording like Susan experienced, is your full legal name. That's your energetic key to open the record. So if you were to ever change your legal name based on marriage or otherwise, your path in the records shifts just like it does in a physical life. And the other thing is the questions that you want to explore. And I find it's kind of funny to me, often without ever seeing the questions, the stuff comes up. Like what you're feeling into intuitively will kind of naturally trickle its way in different ways. I mean, I believe we're all intuitive. I've put a lot of time and effort into honing into my intuition. And so tactically, it's accessing and tapping into this infinite data source that exists for all of us. The Akashic records in the past, there would have to be something like a mystic or a sage or a spiritualist or some kind of ordained person in order to tap in. People would go through someone. My ultimate goal is that having this practice and really starting to develop this self-awareness, you can tap in yourself too. There's books out there that you can learn how to do this. It really is kind of like a meditative practice is what it feels like. To me, it gives it a little bit more roots, and the way the information comes through, I trust and can validate because it's totally different for whoever I'm reading for. For example, someone is an artist might come through in pictures or colors. Susan, I think there was a lot of like water metaphors because of your river rafting.
Surprise. You said that, and I was like, yeah, a little bit of water in my life.
This is where it's information I wouldn't have any idea. I don't go research, and I'm very discerning about, I don't want you to say anything because I don't want the field to get interrupted, especially if I'm reading for someone in person and it's someone I want to catch up with. I'm like, hold on, let's just wait until after the fact. And my ability to read is dependent on how open someone is. So if someone is curious and like really, truly ready and open, and you decide if you commit to the experience, that's your openness to go and explore and see what can happen.
Amazing.
So you said something to me, I think it was almost one of your first lines in the recording. And this was before you even began, I think, and at least in the audio message you sent me, that was like, wow, wait, hold on. Anxiety and like excitement can feel the same in our bodies. And you're just like, okay, so now we're going to like take some breaths. And then you began my recording. And I wanted to say that first sentence that you gave me, combined with what you just said about our name. So the question here is that like our childhood histories, where potentially some of us had different legal names, for instance, maybe some of us didn't, but for even those that didn't, is there a way that you are, I don't know, bringing in those childhood experiences into your readings? Is there something about like the longer history or the longer past that's showing up in different ways? And does that change if our legal name changed, perhaps? Because that specific line for me is something I think that started a long, long time ago.
So the thing that I'll say to address this in the beginning is you'll never receive something that you don't want to hear, and different types of information will come through to different people. So through the Akashic Records, we can tap into past life information. We can tap into a pattern maybe that you're running within your life. And really, in the most simple way, it's the story of your soul. That's what we're looking at. So if something from someone's childhood needs to come up, I do have things from childhood, different points of people's childhood. But I think this is also what helps me to trust. It's not like some kind of formula, like I'm going to pull from inner child here and your career here and your modern life here to give you something. It really is just dependent on what you need to hear. So sometimes we need to go reclaim something that happened within our childhood. Sometimes that is like the key, if you will, to unlocking what we need in our physical life today. Sometimes it is a past life, and that's where past life information will come through. Sometimes it's oriented in soul purpose. So I have had people that have tried to come to me and like, I want to know past lives, like give me past life information. And I'm upfront with people. If something with past life isn't going to serve in the reading right now, it won't come through. And I have enough, I think, confidence in myself at this point to say, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen because you don't need it at this moment in time. And that's why every reading is uniquely different. Just like you're going to wake up tomorrow and be a slightly different person, a reading would be different for you now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because you'll have had a set of different life experiences, and therefore your lens and perspective on the world has shifted. So I love this as a practice to continue coming back to as well.
Yeah.
On that note, this has been such a beautiful conversation, and I wish that we could sit here all day. I have a million questions about how it works, what happens, what you see, all these things. I used to call myself a real estate geek. I think now I'm more of a spiritual geek with a little dash of real estate in there. So I could geek out about this all day. That's where we're going to have the listener follow up with you to ask their own questions. But before we get to that, we're going to dive into the Life and Money Show Spotlight Round. Kim, we're going to ask you 3 questions we ask all our guests. Are you ready?
Yes, let's go.
All right. First question is about your life and money. So share with us one thing that you're doing to help create a meaningful and intentional life by design.
The biggest thing is having my own personal practice. And this has evolved as I've come into motherhood. I used to love to sit for 45 minutes in the morning with my cup of coffee and journal. And it's almost like Susan's laughing. I'm laughing too. Like
I am. I'm like, oh, those days were great.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Now I do make sure to find at least 1 to 2 minutes where I can just check in with myself. Sometimes it's 1 sip of coffee in the morning just to anchor myself and like, okay, I'm here, my feet are on the ground, because we're operating from a place of disembodiment all the time. We don't even realize it. So trying to kind of help myself anchor in I'm here, take a breath, before I start the day. And I think as kids get older, I'll go back to my hour or whatever, but it's just important to have that connection with yourself, in my opinion.
It's such a great reminder. And sometimes I'm doing a meditation at the end of the day. It's a guided meditation and say, maybe this is the first time today you've noticed your breath. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it is.
Yes.
So yeah, for the listener, if that's you right now, maybe we can all take a collective breath together and just anchor in this moment.
And I love that it can be one sip of coffee too, to just say, I'm here. Here I am in this day. Here's my body. And then you get onto your to-do list, the monstrous of the to-do list that can feel overwhelming. It does make it less so.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Next question is about others' life and money. So share with us a life or money hack. And by hack, we mean loosely a tool, a tip, a resource, a book, something that has helped you on your journey that you think may help the listener as well.
So here's another one from motherhood that I have learned and I think is my ultimate life hack. It's the night routine. Everyone is super obsessed with the morning routine. And look, I love a good morning routine, but I found my son's sleep schedule was all over the place and I kept getting so frustrated. I just want my time to myself. So the night routine is really about setting yourself up for the next day so that you can meet the moment with a little bit more flow. Everyone's night routine can be different. For us in our house, it looks like we get the coffee set up. We never go to bed with dishes still in the sink or anything. I get clothes laid out sometimes the night before. I'll do a meditation or something kind of to connect with myself before I go to bed. And then in my mind, I'm giving myself a gift to future me. It's like I'm able to transport myself into the future and go like, all right, girlfriend, I got you. We're going to get ourselves set up. And also you can think that it's almost letting yourself marinate in the kind of energy that you want to bring into the next day as well. So we're talking like 10, 15 minutes. I'm huge on practical solutions that work for your life. It does not need to be all airy-fairy 10 minutes. Get yourself set up.
Love that, especially with young kids in the house. I mean, I remember those days when if one of my kids was up earlier, couldn't sleep, and was up at 5 a.m., my whole morning was shot. And then I'd feel like, oh, I just lost all this time. But I love that you're not only starting in the morning, you're starting the night before and you're setting yourself up for success. I love that. That's such a great mindful practice. Also to celebrate the day that you just lived and say, today was a day well lived, and I'm going to set myself up for tomorrow. So that's a beautiful, beautiful practice. Third and final question is around life and money and the world. Kim, tell us one thing that you're doing to help make the world a better place, whatever that means to you.
I think this work is my ultimate offering to the world. I really, truly believe that helping people connect back to themselves and their intuition is the path forward for all of us. It's tricky and it can be challenging to look within. And I know there is some fear, but if I can be a teammate, if you will, to hold your hand and show you it's really not that scary when we go look inside and ignite that passion and that fire to live into alignment with what life really looks and feels like to you. This is why I love all the work you do around Life by Design. It's intentional work. This doesn't just happen by chance. I don't actually believe in coincidence whatsoever. So we have to meticulously sometimes and practically plan for how we want our life to look and feel and be to live into our soul purposes and missions.
And I 100% agree. There are no accidents. I was telling Susan that when you first reached out to us to potentially work with us and write some pieces, I have emails like that come across my desk, so many every day. I'm delete, 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 delete. For whatever reason, your name came across my desk and I thought, let me look into this a little bit more. And who knows what it was, but out of the hundreds of emails, yours came across and I was like, let's pursue this. And then you've written these beautiful pieces for us, and the listener can find them on the Goodegg blog. There's so much soul in what you write. And I love that we get to bring that to the Goodegg community. On that note, I know that the listener is going to have more questions. Hopefully, they'll consider doing an Akashic Records reading with you. And I know you do so much more than that too. So maybe they'll reach out with other questions and consider working with you. So tell them if they did want to follow up with you and learn more, what's the best place that they can go?
Yeah. And again, thank you so much for having me. It's the story of our relationship and really getting the opportunity to meet both of you and to work in the records together. That's like the stuff of magic of following the nudges. And you never know what's going to happen when you follow the voice. So the best place to reach me is my website. It's kimknievel.com. I also have a Substack where I go into all things purpose and meaning and building a life that feels right for you. So I'd invite you to follow along. That's a free resource just to dive into these kind of conversations. I find myself all the time craving community that wants to go there. So please, even if you're just curious to know more about the Akashic Records, or you're in your own journey of wanting to connect with yourself and don't know where to start, I would be so honored to support you in that.
Yeah. And Kim, just for anybody who may be listening to this and isn't on our website with the show notes, spell your full URL for us, because Knievel can be a little tricky for people.
Yes. The thing I will say is I married into Evel Knievel's bloodline. So if you get lost on the spelling, you can look up Evel Knievel, but it's KimKnievel.com.
Kim Knievel.
We just got this book for my daughter that is P is for pterodactyl, and it's like a terrible alphabet book. And I think it says that right away. She's learning to read. But I love that your Knievel, like it actually is fairly phonetic for a word that starts with K and has an N that follows the K. Like, because K is for knife in this book that I bought my daughter.
It's like Knuffle Bunny. Do you know that? The picture book,
that's
Knuffle Bunny. Oh gosh, you have to get that one. That'll be really good. Well, Kim, thank you so much. Kim Knievel, ex-corporate communications leader, mom, writer, student of soulful studies, Akashic Records expert, and so much more. Kim, thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your amazing journey with us and our listener.
Thank you so much for having me.